Hey everybody, Sujan Patel here. I got Florin Tatulea. Super pumped to talk to him about how to grow sales, how to grow a business to 20 million in revenue. He's the director of sales at Barley. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Before we jump in, would you mind just sharing a bit about your background, kind of what you've been up to and how long you've been in sales?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in sales for quite a while, like from selling newspapers door to door back in when I was like 14 to selling college pro paint jobs door
Yeah.
to door as well. But my main career started in sales about 9 years ago or almost a decade ago. So ever since then, I started off as an SDR. I was an account executive for a number of years, then went on to leading sales development teams over a period of 3 years. And now I'm trying to get more well rounded and expand to general sales leadership as the director of sales here at Barley.
Awesome. So you have an interesting concept called people first leadership. What is that? And why is it important?
Yeah, I think to me, people first leadership is leading by example. And I think one of the main ways that I think about gaining trust with any team that I inherit or I build is making sure that I can actually walk the talk. I think there's a lot of managers out there, from my experience, that I've seen where it's like they tell you to do certain things, but have never really done it themselves. So for me, in sales development leadership, that means like at least in the early days, I'm on the phones, I'm continuously prospecting, I'm sharpening my skills and trying to be at the frontier of understanding like what is working, what new technologies are,
Hmm.
and being in the trenches. I literally have a newsletter called Prospecting from the Trenches, where like on a
Love
weekly
it.
basis, I talk about what successes I'm seeing from being on the trenches. And to this day, I'm still prospecting and taking calls. So that's what it's all about to me, I think.
Love it. Yeah, I think I'm a firm believer of this approach where you don't ask somebody to do something you haven't done or not capable of doing, especially in like sales and marketing, because uh, as they get go through the journey, if you don't know, if you've never done it, you can't help them when they get stuck. You're not speaking from experience. But I know you've scaled a couple sales teams. Can you share some information or helpful tips or anything you've learned from kind of uh, things to consider when scaling a sales team?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like a lot to that, and I think there's different levels of scale. Like for example, there's the journey that I'm on right now, like going from 0 to 1, and then there's like how do you go from like 1 to 10, and then
Hmm.
10 plus. So I think there's different things that are important at different times, but I think one of the big lessons that I've had is like it's what in the beginning you have to figure out like how to like sell yourself, and then the challenge becomes once you get good at it, how do you not necessarily like recreate yourself, but how can you document all these different steps or all the different nuances that you kind of picked up along the way to be able to share that with somebody that has less context or is like a new SDR or a new AE. And it's kind of funny because I do some advising right now for different companies, and one of the first things that we do is an exercise on looking at different personas and like the what are the key metrics they're evaluated on, what are their problems, and how does the solution ultimately pertain to that. And I tend to find that a lot of like founders and leaders, you almost like just you don't understand that you know these things implicitly because you have experience in the industry, but like you need to
Hmm.
document like every little step along the way. For example, it's like, oh, I know that, let's say, in the insurance space, a VP of distribution is actually the same as a VP of sales. They're like, you almost just take that for granted that you inherited that knowledge over time from having all these calls with
Hmm.
different titles. But a new SDR that comes in, if they're going to go and search up somebody on LinkedIn, how are they supposed to know that a VP of distribution is the same as a VP of sales? So
Yeah.
I think one of the first parts of scale is like you really need to have a step by step playbook, uh, and don't assume that somebody just understands anything.
Love it. Yeah, I think the documentation super key. You're spot on. So many little things are kind of come from experience, and you can't expect to. give that experience to new hires instantly. Um, let's
Yeah.
switch gears. I think at your last company, it sounded like you took the company from zero to you're along and leading the journey from 0 to 20 million in revenue.
Mhm.
Um, first of all, like how do you how do you meant and you also mentioned like there's different phases. How'd you last like from 0 to 20 million? That's a very tough spread. Different scales of
Yeah.
the size of the company too.
And I'm glad you made the clarification there too, because it's not. I never want to say that I got the company there because it's not true in any way whatsoever. Like I started off as an SDR there, so I'm not going to make any type of those crazy claims. I think I was not even a sales leader until probably like 5 years in, really 4.5
Mm-hmm.
years in. So I think there was definitely a few lessons there of like how I had quite a long stint at that company, 6.5 years, and we actually went past 20 million by the time I was there. But like that's kind of like the main area where I like to believe I focus on. Um, I would probably say the first thing is like again going back to phases. So 0 to 1 is just in some ways brute force. Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people think that there's some magic pill or some magic like tool or technology or AI or something is going to get you there.
Mm-hmm.
And people have found out the secret, like a growth hacking secret, which I just don't think
Yeah.
it's true. It's like to this day, right now in the 0 to 1 journey at Barley, it's like reaching out to people, going to your network, taking a ton of demos, like screwing up on those demos, trying to reposition, thousands of emails, thousands of calls. Like there is no secret from 0 to 1. I think you just have to brute force it in many
Yep.
ways.
Yeah. I don't think, I think there's like articles and a lot of folks that have like founders who've done 0 to 1. Like I've been in 0 to 1, I don't know, like 7, 8 times now. And there's no like, I'm not any better like the 10th time. It's just like luck. Maybe I have a little bit more experience of what not to fail, but every business is like different. So I feel you on the like, it's just brute force. It's just hard work. But what about like 1 to maybe 10, or where's the next phase go?
Yeah, so I guess picking up on needing to like replicate and kind of scale something that works. So the next phase is like after you've developed a little bit of product market fit, and my
Mm-hmm.
founder said this really well. Is like you almost need to understand the prospect really well and start a tactical example is like what are the key phrases that your customers or prospects continuously are saying on calls. So for example, when we were at Lupio and we were selling an RFP response platform, it was continuously like just basic terms like we're so tired of copy and pasting and trying to find an answer in Google Doc, taking that and putting it in a document and doing that over and over and over again for 100, 200, 300 questions. So what we realized is like this was a phrase that without us prompting our prospect, they continuously brought like almost the exact same sequence of words on a call. So what we would do is we'd actually play that back to prospects in the discovery process and be like, hey, I've been talking to a ton of people that are building proposals and they keep saying how annoying it is to have to control F, copy and paste an answer, put it in a document hundreds of times in a row. And then like these key phrases kind of show that you have product market fit because it's becoming a repeatable thing now.
Mm-hmm.
So one little tactical thing that you could do is like play those problems back to your customers and make them understand that you know the problem and can relate to them and be in their shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how we ended up like really scaling and doubling down on a certain persona or account
Mm-hmm.
type.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's like that 0 to 1 is really like trying to figure out what are these problems that you can attach yourself to, and
Yeah.
then you're almost copying and pasting that problem across your team once you figure it out. Kind of
Yeah.
what's that trigger point?
Yeah, exactly. And the another thing I would say about scaling is like focus. I think this is a mistake that I've made in the past, and even a lot of companies that I'm advising now. It's like it people are too broad in their go-to-market approach, especially in the early days when you don't need to be. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you can get to 1 million, 5 million, even 10 million in ARR with like a pretty like niche type of persona, but being able to actually really define it. And I think a lot of people will be like, oh, like when you ask them who's your ICP or ideal customer profile, they're like, oh, it's like B2B SaaS companies that are in growth stage. And it's not specific enough. And this goes back to your sales team. It's like if you think about an SDR and AE reaching out and prospecting, if you give them that broad criteria, there's going to be a million different companies that they could reach out to, but
Mhm.
uh, there's usually like a small subset or type of company that you
Mhm.
have in your CRM that like you close higher than others. There's something
Yeah.
interesting or different about them. So you need to narrow down and find out what that is, right? And I always like to give examples. So even at Barley, we're a compensation management platform. So we help companies with compensation analytics, automating compensation cycles, benchmarking data. So right now, the what I'm trying to do is like when I find product market fit, what are the nuances of accounts that we win that signal to me that I should go after more accounts like this? And
Hmm.
it could one thing I'm realizing it's like, for example, sure, companies that are 200 to 500 employees in high growth, but what else? Multiple locations. They manage currencies in, sorry, they manage compensation or comp plans in different currencies, which we can handle, is one thing. They're using a certain type of HRIS system that we integrate with. They have what we consider HR maturity. So they have more than like a 1 to 50 ratio from HR to employee count,
Hmm.
where it means like their team is already thinking about being strategic as opposed to being reactive. So these are all like these nuances that are so key that I notice a lot of sales teams don't do well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. I think people mistake the answer of like, oh, I go after companies that are 1 to 50 million in revenue and 200 employees or greater, as that's ICP. That's not that's everybody. That's like there's too many companies there. But you're like HRS system, like this problem. They're like, it sounds like HRS means that they're proactive in solving something or they're looking to solve something, and then that's the trigger. But so I love the fact that you're like kind of being very, very specific, and you can be specific in very different places, and then over time, I'm assuming over time as you scale, you can either find multiple personas or multiple things to look for, or broaden that thing.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the phase of like 10 million plus. I think that's when you can start thinking about, okay, are there other verticals that we can reach out to? Do we go international and like build an EMEA presence or APAC or whatever? But I actually wrote like a newsletter, a blog post on like the 10 lessons that I had from, zero to this 20 million, or I think it was like
Yeah.
30 million essentially. And that was one of the lessons. Like, you don't need to diversify your customer base and go into multiple verticals and go global early on. Like, focus on a smaller subset. I think that's like quite important.
Love it. Yeah. And we'll share I've actually shared that article with my leadership team. And it was just that. I was like, hey, let's go after one customer and let's do this really freaking well. And then let's, expand from there. Um, really good, quick, simple, easy, maybe to understand example for us is, there are three dominant CRMs in the space: Salesforce, HubSpot, and Pipedrive. And the order of magnitude goes down. For us, HubSpot users who have a team of five or greater are it's the exact pain point. And you get too big and it's like that pain point's there, but they're past the like pain. They might have already solved the problem. But at 5 to 10 sales reps, they're in that weed. They're dealing with a deliverability issue. Let's put it that way. But
Yeah.
anyways, being specific, super, super helpful. So that's very helpful. And I like, again, 0 to 1 brute force, 1 to 10 is really about finding those problems, and then 10 and greater is maybe expanding into, are there multiple ICPs, are there different regions, or really going beyond that, like copy and paste, where you were in that 1 to 10. Let's move on,
Yeah.
and last question here. I know you're fairly good at social selling. First of all, what the heck is social selling, and then how do you fit that in your strategy, if any?
Yeah. I think a lot of people mistaken posting on LinkedIn with social selling, and this is actually a distinction that I always make. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
give you a perfect example. So I built my like a persona. You can say I'm a content creator on LinkedIn. A lot of my content is sales related, and my audience is mainly salespeople. Now, that doesn't mean that when I came to Barley and I'm selling into the HR persona that I'm going to be great at social selling, because one, I'd either has to have to completely change all of the content that I have and my audience, And right now, my persona doesn't really resonate with like the HR persona. So
Mm.
I'm actually right now not in a fantastic position where I can you leverage social selling and become a thought leader in HR, or I can, but I'd have to completely change my persona on LinkedIn, right?
Mm-hmm.
So social selling to me is becoming somewhat of like a having some kind of a perspective, not necessarily a thought leader on certain topics. So like in HR or compensation in my case, and being able to either leverage that persona or reach out to people through your network to get introductions to the appropriate people. So, like one thing I'm doing a lot now, I'm like, okay, I'm going to leverage my sales persona, reach out to other salespeople, and get introductions to like HR. So, in a way, that's social selling. In a way, it's also like, um, how am I how am I thinking about outreach on LinkedIn and adding that to a multi-channel sequence or cadence that I have. So those are a few examples.
Love it. Yeah. And I think the early distinction of like posting, that's just that's marketing. That's just getting yourself out there. It's for building a personal brand, staying active, and the distinction of uh, that you do not have the persona you're going after. So it actually requires work, and and almost like you probably have a lot of false positives. Right? Let's say you're going to go use LinkedIn as a key part of your social selling. Well, your views are going to be up, but they're the wrong views, right? It's funny you say this because like I, I built my personal brand prior to running Mailshake. I sold I ran a marketing agency and I sold to like founders and VP of marketing or CMOs. And you look at all my posts, like if you look at the actual personas that review that look at my content, it's founders and VP of marketing. I've pivoted to selling to salespeople, and I get 5%. And so I was like, hey, any sales rep can beat me in the number of views. It might be like 10%, but you're doubling the views of actual relevant people because I don't have that. So, I feel good that I've like shared it. I got 2,000 views, but it's like, nope, it's only like 20 views or 50 views of actual sales reps. So you got to start over and know that little detail. But anyways, thank you so much for joining. I really, yeah, you're one of the most humble sales folks I know. If most people would be like, wearing 0 to 30 million on their chest, and you're like, no, it wasn't just me, it was it was a team effort, and here's the phases and all that stuff. So thank you so much for breaking this down, and we'll link to some of the content you reference. If you haven't, you got to follow Florin on LinkedIn, drops knowledge bomb, and subscribe to his newsletter. Anything else to add, Florin?
I just dropped like a 3 hour course on emailing, prospecting, sequencing, which I'm pretty pumped about. That was in partnership with Chris Orlob from Gong. So I put a
Nice.
ton of effort into that. Like if you guys all want to check that out, it's on my featured section in my profile.
Love it. All right, we'll link to that as well. So yeah, I can't wait.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure.